All right, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to raise the awareness of trauma and to support and inspire new trauma therapists just starting out on the trauma-informed journey. I do that with my membership community, Trauma Therapist 2.0, my online courses and workshops, and the Trauma Therapist newsletter. If you're a therapist of any kind and you work with individuals who've been impacted by trauma, I invite you to head on over to my website at thetraumatherapistproject.com. That's thetraumatherapistproject.com. All right, let's get started. Ready?
Yes.
All right. So 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. Very excited to have as my guest today, Dr. Melanie Salmon. Melanie, welcome.
Welcome. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
You are welcome. So Dr. Melanie Salmon is a medical doctor, a Gestalt psychotherapist, a trauma specialist and teacher, and she's committed her life to the exploration and practice of healing. During her 40 years in medicine, Melanie became increasingly frustrated with the limited ability for pharmaceutical drugs to treat the cause of health issues, including psycho-emotional conditions in her patients. To her, it became clear that these problems were related to a dysfunctional nervous system caused by unresolved and unhealed trauma. This understanding led her to leave medicine to seek out a better way. In 2008, she found it, combining the best from many modalities, including Gestalt psychotherapy, neuroscience, and epigenetics. Drawing inspiration from both the traditional and modern, Dr. Salmon created quantum energy coaching, or QEC, revolutionizing the way we approach healing. It's a simple yet profoundly effective method that works with a subconscious mind. QEC is a clinically usable tool that heals the effects of past trauma and changes limiting beliefs rapidly and safely. Wow. That's a lot. Well, we'll get into that. Before we get going here, Melanie, share with our listeners where you're from originally and where you are currently.
All right. So I currently live in England, in Devon, but I'm actually a South African. I was born in Johannesburg and went right through my medical career in South Africa and actually moved to England in my late 20s. So my medical career has been spent in England. I was a GP for the best part of 35 years.
Wow. So, okay, this is a very interesting shift for me, moving from the medical field into therapy and slash coaching. But let's kind of look at a little closely, Melanie, what got you interested in becoming a doctor in the first place?
I think it was probably the trauma of my own childhood that forced me to take up medicine. I've actually written my own book, which is my life story, which covers this. I'll mention that at the end. But my mother was dying of cancer, and I really was trying to find a way to help her. So I came from a very traumatic background, went into medicine with high ideals, only to discover through the course of my medical learning, through understanding what cancer was really about, that actually she had lied to me. And in fact, she lived to the age of 92 in the end.
Wow.
So it was a very strange situation of manipulation to get me into her service. She was actually quite narcissistic, and it was one way of being able to get me into service, but I didn't know that. So I went in for that reason, very nobly, to save my mother, and then had to deal with the fact that it was a huge lie and betrayal. But by then I was halfway through medicine and decided to dedicate myself to helping people who really were ill.
Wow. Yeah. So what inspired you was based on a lie.
Yes.
That's pretty intense.
Yes. It was very shocking,
to say the least.
19 years old when I confronted her about the lie, and she denied that she'd ever lied to me. So it was a really, you know the term cognitive dissonance, when you just don't know what to do with the reality. So yes, it was very difficult.
So you end up practicing for many years?
Yes.
Okay. How did things begin to unfold such that you realize pharmaceuticals aren't working. Walk us through that process. When did you begin to start thinking in those terms?
I think it's really was only in the last 10 years or so. So talking from about 2000 onwards, I've eventually left in 2008. It was in those last 10 years that people were getting sicker uh, instead of getting better. And my understanding was that medical science was improving. And I couldn't understand why, therefore, the results were getting worse. Again, sort of cognitive dissonance about what I was facing every day. I was a very good doctor. I was also a talk therapist. I'd studied Gestalt psychotherapy, so I knew how to talk to my patients. But the only tool I had was a pharmaceutical agent. And
Mhm.
they weren't getting better, they were getting sicker. And the thing that really bothered me in those last years was how many pharmaceuticals people were beginning to depend on, talking about 8, 9, 10 drugs, all of which were carrying their own side effects and negative limitations on the physiology of the body. And the whole system just seemed to me to be absolutely crazy.
Mhm.
I spent a lot of time talking to patients and getting to know their stories. And it was during that honest attempt to try and find a better way that I began to tie together the story of the childhood and the past of a lot of my patients and what they were not getting in terms of medicine.
So
Because
let me just interrupt. So just to be clear here, we're talking about a certain what category of ailments. We're not talking because you're not. Just correct me if I'm wrong. You're not saying all pharmaceuticals are bad. Are you saying or what?
well, I've developed more and more in that direction where I'm almost about to say that all are bad.
Okay.
At the time, no. What I was talking about at the time of understanding what was going on and why people were on so many is chronic disease. It seemed to me that, I was working in a very poor area in England, socioeconomically deprived area. And there were a lot of people who had come back from war. The men were suffering from depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, and so on. And all we had was a bunch of pharmaceuticals to dampen down their stress, their depression, their anxiety, their sleeplessness, and their aches and pains and their chronic illness. And that was a sort of cohort of patients that I was looking after that were getting worse with the years and not better. And all we could do was add another drug. You've got this
Mhm.
problem, we'll take this as well. And the whole thing just seemed crazy to me. And as I say, what I started to do was I started to spend time with them. I'd go and do home visits and spend my free afternoon time
Wow.
finding out their stories. What got you into this poor situation or this post war situation. And every time I listened to a story, it traced back to a childhood trauma or some trauma in the past. And I started to see links between trauma and current poor health. And
Mhm.
I kept going to my partners and saying, this is an incredible discovery. Are you not interested? And the response was usually, sorry, haven't got time, too busy,
Mhm.
I can't discuss it now. And people just weren't interested. And I began to realize that the way medicine was structured was, 6 minutes, a patient, a quick response, quick prescription, and that was it. That was all people were offering. And it just, a few years of that, and I just couldn't take it anymore. I
It
really
sounds like you have a really interesting and a unique window having studied Gestalt therapy as well. Is it safe to say that most physicians, they don't go to their patients' homes and talk to them and ask about what's going on in their lives? Is that safe to say?
Well, that's yes, that's much more unusual because it had to be done in my own time. It had to be done in that part of the day when I was off. But I was driven to find out. I wanted to know why people were so sick and
Right.
so compromised and unable to work. And I knew there had to be a story behind it. And so, yeah, that was the very beginning of asking a lot of questions, finding out more information and piecing together the stories and realizing that that we had it all wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know what the solution was. I'm in a better position having been out of medicine for 12 years, but at the time, all I knew was I had to leave. And it was scary because it was, a well-paid job. I was the main breadwinner in the family, and it wasn't easy. But luckily, I had a very supportive husband who said to me he was willing to live in a cardboard box under a flyover. Let's do it.
Oh my gosh.
So he was willing to take, the drop in income, which of course we did have initially.
Right. So, from my anecdotal understanding, some pharmaceuticals help. Obviously, a lot of us know that there are a lot of side effects that come with those. But as you were about to say, you're about to get to the point where you're about to say all pharmaceuticals, we just do away with them. We need to do so. Is there a place for pharmaceuticals in the treatment of PTSD or anxiety or depression?
Let's put it this way. The place that they have is absolute necessity because there's nothing else. If there were other treatments that worked for PTSD, anxiety, and depression, then we wouldn't have to use them. We've become dependent on pharmaceuticals because we've been so programmed to rely on them. And I think that the problem with medicine is it goes all the way back to the 1920s when pharmaceuticals started coming in. And I think that all doctors now I certainly know my training as a doctor, there's no other training. You're not given any other opportunity. And you're so busy that you don't have an opportunity to think of anything else. For me to go out and do counseling training was unusual. Again, I had to do that on my weekends in my own time. So I was already beginning to gain another perspective. So I think that, yes, anybody who is suffering from stress, anxiety, PTSD, and goes to their doctors, there's very little else available to them. That pharmaceutical is most likely to be prescribed and probably needed because they're in such distress. And it's all the medications are, in my view, especially psycho-emotional ones, are a band-aid over a wound. It's not taking the wound away. The minute you stop the medication, the person has the problem back again. It's not curative, it's a band-aid. Mm-hmm. And that's the problem for me.
Right, as it is for a lot of us. So you started going to your patients' homes and talking to them, listening to them. What did you hear? What were you hearing when you finally said, boom?
I was hearing stories of trauma. I was hearing stories of what had happened to them from the time they were little, stories of poverty, stories of marital disharmony, stories of death and dying and being left alone as a child to fend for themselves. The whole storyline in this area was very clearly to me people who were compromised emotionally, physically, psychologically, and in every way, and ending up in their 20s and 30s with what I was then treating them for, diabetes. Some of them even had early cancers. Many of them had hypertension, heart disease, and so on. And it was like, why are people in their 30s getting this? I was trying to understand, because I'd been in a different general practice before that. I was in a sort of a well-to-do area where people were only getting their heart attacks in their 50s. And in this particular area, all those problems were at least 15 to 20 years earlier. Mm-hmm. And it was like, why are people in their 20s getting insulin-dependent diabetes? I couldn't understand that. So that's where I went to find out the story, and every single time. And of course, now that I'm a trauma specialist, there's a complete link, mm-hmm. And in fact, there's been a study done, I'm sure you know about it, the ACEs study in the States, mm-hmm. where the greater the number of adverse circumstances in childhood, the higher the physiological responses in terms of illness. So cancers, heart disease, even early death are all related to early trauma. I didn't know the ACEs study then. When I discovered about it, it was fantastic because it was confirming what I discovered.
So over how long of a period of time was this where you were discovering this, learning this?
Probably only about 3-4 years.
Okay. So what do you do? What steps do you start to take?
I didn't know what to do. I used to come I used to come home to my husband and say, there has to be another way. I didn't know about leaving. I didn't think about leaving. I didn't know what the other way was. I just knew it wasn't working. And a friend of ours gave me a book, lent me a book called The Biology of Belief by Bruce Lipton during this time. And when I read that book, it was, a penny dropped. It was like, oh my God, this is the other way. This is what we're doing wrong. And I realized then, because he talked about the subconscious mind and that any change that you want, because I knew how to talk with the conscious mind. I was a Gestalt therapist, but it didn't really help my clients, didn't help my patients. So that book was the turning point for me. I realized that I had the other way to help people was to find a way to work with the subconscious mind, having read the book, having understood the science. The problem was that I thought that I'd just go and learn it. I thought I would leave medicine and go and find out how to work with the subconscious mind. But it turned out there wasn't really any way to work. Nobody had discovered it yet. Nobody had done the work. So I went out to research to find out how to work with the subconscious mind. I went to some trainings and little courses here, there in neurology, but there wasn't much. There were people doing, isolated things, and I was looking for a comprehensive treatment. And then again, one day, I'm really luckily married to a man who comes up with good ideas. He said to me, haven't you done enough training? Why don't you put it together and make your own treatment? And I said, don't be ridiculous. I can't do that. But I slept on it, and the next day I woke up and I thought, he's got a point. Maybe I can. I'm jolly well going to do that. So I used my basis of medical knowledge. I used my Gestalt psychotherapy as the foundation for it. And then I pulled in everything I'd learned about working with the subconscious mind and put them all together and created my own method. It took me about a year to do it.
So help me understand, you learn after going to your patients' homes, talking to them, hearing their stories, realizing that trauma was underlying most of what was happening with these individuals. How did you get to the point where, okay, it's the subconscious mind, as opposed to, well, I need to learn more about trauma and trauma treatment and somatic work and all that stuff? Or are you making a definite distinction there? Are you also incorporating, somatic therapies and trauma treatments and so forth in the work you're doing?
So I wasn't looking at it in terms of somatic work, because I hadn't done any somatic work. Remember, I was just a talk therapist, a Gestalt talk.
Right.
I hadn't done any somatic work at all. I did do TRE for a few years, trauma release exercises. That's the only somatic work I've done. And I thought that might be the way through. And for me, the problem with trauma release exercise, I actually became a trainer in South Africa for 10 years, and I ran it alongside my own QEC work. But I found that it didn't last. People felt better while they did the TRE, but as soon as they stopped shaking off their trauma, their autonomic nervous system became dysregulated again.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't taking the cause away. So when I was looking for another way, basically I was looking for a way to get in to change the physiology of trauma. Okay, and I knew that talk therapy couldn't do it. And then Bruce Lipton made me realize that that's because our conscious mind is a tiny computer, whereas the subconscious mind is a massive computer. So I thought, if I can go into the big computer of the mind, I can heal the trauma that way through talk therapy, by using the technique to get the changes that need to be made to install them at the subconscious level of mind. So it's still a talk therapy type,
Right.
but it gets installed at the subconscious level.
Interesting. All right. Let me just remind everyone that I'm speaking with Dr. Melanie Salmon. She's the founder of Quantum Energy Coaching, or QEC. Her website is qecliving.com. So let's take a step back and kind of do a little deep dive into how you're working. How does this work? How does help working with the subconscious mind help treat work with trauma?
Well, um, I'm wondering how the best way would be to describe it. So, I just give you a rundown of what a session looks like. So I had a session today with somebody who I saw for the first time, and she presented with panic attacks. She's severe panic attacks, can't leave the house, has had anxiety since the last 6 months through the lockdown, where she was not allowed to go and visit her elderly parents who are very ill. So a lot of trauma had been happening over this period of the lockdown. This is a woman in middle age. This loss of control in her life has finally led to what I recognize as a breakdown in her autonomic nervous system. It become switched on in fight and flight, and so she was having panic attacks. And so on. So this is a typical kind of presentation, somebody who's got a lot of physical symptoms, emotional symptoms, mental symptoms. And then I asked the story, what was going on in your life 6 months ago when it started? It was a lockdown situation. Anything else going on? Well, yes, I've also had problems with my husband. There's relationship issues. There are in-law issues. And we went through today all the various areas that may well have created through stimulation on the autonomic nervous system, which is core to health. It's core to physical and mental health. When trauma it impacts the autonomic nervous system, it becomes dysregulated. So people start to get symptoms of that, usually anxiety, but some people will also get other symptoms like excessive anger or excessive crying or shame. There are many emotions can be stimulated. So I do a sort of talk therapy session. The good 40 minutes, almost an hour, will be spent hearing about the problem. And then the next part of the therapy is to empower the client to bring about change. What I say to them is, if you could change your situation, you've got panic attacks now. If you could take a magic wand or the concept of a miracle, tell me how you would feel if things could be different, if this was gone. And she said, well, I want to be free of panic attacks. So I take her words, because we're going to install into her subconscious mind. So I don't use my own words. I support her to come up with a solution. And I will create a sentence in the first person present tense. I am free of panic attacks on all levels. And that's the first sentence. And so we go through the various things she shared with me. Each time I give her the magic wand or the miracle. And I say, if you could change that, how would you like things with your husband? Well, I would like my situation resolved. So we set a whole lot of goals today about what she would like to work with. This is the first session. So we set the intentions and install them with the technique. The technique is quite easy to do. Even children can do it. It's quite simple. And it creates a gamma brainwave, which is a very fast brainwave, through a certain way of breathing, bringing up a feeling of gratitude and sitting in a whole brain crossover position. And it's very easy to do. So we install the sentences, and from that moment, she will begin to feel immediate response and relief, because the power of the subconscious is immediate, and it already starts to change the brain. So when people come to me with panic attacks and so on, by the next day, their anxiety and their panic are almost gone. It's reduced by about 80-90%. And then when they come for subsequent sessions, I don't usually see people for more than 4 or 5 sessions in total. It's very quick work. When she comes for subsequent sessions, I work on each of the traumas that she's mentioned. And I have a trauma formula where we work through a whole series of things that releases that trauma, because trauma is hardwired into the brain. You see, it's different to all other memories. It's hardwired in what's called procedural memory, which is that part of the brain where you learn to ride a bicycle and you learn speech. So you never forget that. And unfortunately, trauma gets hardwired there. And that's why we never forget our traumas, and we get triggered into them quite easily. So I work with the brain, and we change in the hardwiring area. We completely change that and release it. It's like wiping that area clean. And that trauma is gone. When the person comes back next time, they say, it's really interesting. I know it's there, it's in the distance, it doesn't bother me anymore, I'm not triggered by it anymore. So they have a distant memory of it, but they don't have that intense triggering back into it.
And that's set into motion with those beliefs, those statements. How would you like, if you could have it be changed, how would you like it to be changed?
So I didn't hear the first part of your question.
The resolve of the trauma, in a sense, is
Yes.
all of it is set into motion by installing these beliefs, these statements.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. When I have a trauma formula, so I do follow a certain strategy. So the first part of the trauma formula is forgiveness. So we forgive the perpetrators of the trauma, and we forgive ourselves for having engaged in it, however little. So forgiveness is a key part of that. Then releasing all the emotions around the trauma, and then I restore safety and trust in myself. If I'm the client, I restore that to 100%, because when you were born, you had 100% internal trust and safety. So we restore that to 100%, because that's very damaged with trauma. And then the last few sentences in the formula are, take the magic wand, how would you be if you'd never had this trauma? And then they define themselves in this new place. And that whole formula, it's about 12 sentences or so. It completely wipes the slate clean. It's incredible. It's very powerful.
Now, is it the same way with someone who's experienced complex trauma or interpersonal trauma, abuse over an extended period of time?
Yes. I might work a little longer with complex trauma. It's not going to be 5 sessions. It's probably going to be 7 or 8 sessions, but it's not long-term therapy. As a Gestalt therapist, I'd be seeing people every week for years
Right.
and years, because that's how it is. That's how talk therapy is,
Now, when you work with the client to come up with these statements of how they'd like it to be if everything was better, do they have to go home and repeat these to themselves?
No, they don't repeat it at all ever. It's one off. You see, this is the power of the subconscious. It's so fantastic. It's a one-off. And the other way the nervous system works in the brain, the way the wiring works, when you find the dominant one, let's say the end plate is around self-worth and self-belief. If you find the most important one to change your self-worth, like I love myself unconditionally, could be the strongest message, and you install that one, all the other neurons connect to not liking myself and whatever, they all disappear when the main one comes on, because it takes all there's a neural growth factor that it needs in order to attach there, and it makes all the others leave. Joe Dispenza has shown videos of how this happens, and it really does happen in real life. You find the right, the strongest belief to install, and then all the connected negative ones just disappear. This is why the healing is so quick. Whereas
Melanie,
with therapy, it's very slow.
This is fascinating. I'm going to have to ask you to come back at some point, and I'd love to, because I'd love to dive into more detail. So what do you do at Quantum Energy Coaching? Are you taking clients? Are you teaching other therapists, or all the above?
Yeah, all the above. I see about 10, 15 clients a week still. I can't not, because there's, quite a demand. There's so much trauma at the moment. But I do training. So I train people in a space of about 20 weeks. It's not a long training. It's adequate. It's enough. I do seminars. I do teach next week I'm doing one on aging. So I'm constantly bringing my community together. We have a thriving community. It's really important that they remain supported. So I run supervision groups, I run seminars, and so on, postgraduate. So yes, it's really a lovely community, certainly.
Awesome.
People seem to enjoy it.
And so people can find out about that, what you're offering at qecliving.com. It's
Yes.
qecliving.com. We'll have that linked up, of course, at the show notes page at the traumatherapistpodcast.com. So you did mention Bruce Lipton's book, which I'm going to get as soon as we stop recording here, Biology of Belief. But you also mentioned at the top your book.
Yes. My book came out in January this year. It's called There Has to Be Another Way, which what was my cry every night when I came home. There has to be another way. My husband said, that'll be the title of your book. And it is.
There has to be another way. Excuse me. And is that available everywhere?
On all the main bookstores.
Okay, awesome. Melanie, you are fascinating and super inspiring. My gosh, I would love to have you back at a later time and we can dive into more details. But wow, just awesome. I'm so glad that people like you are out there doing this.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. It's been a pleasure. We'll talk again. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye. Thank you so much for listening and supporting this podcast. And if you'd like to join the hundreds of other therapists who are each month keeping up to date and informed and inspired about what's going on in the world of trauma, I'd love to invite you to head on over to the Trauma Therapist newsletter. That's the traumatherapistnewsletter.com.